My boyfriend defended his brother for robbing me blind and threatened to dump me if I report him. But what I found on his phone just sent them both to prison. My boyfriend Tyler's brother Jake had broken into my apartment while I was at work and stolen my laptop, my grandmother's ring, and $800 in cash I'd been saving for rent. I had it all on my security camera. Clear as day. Jake using the spare key Tyler had given him without asking me, going through my drawers, taking my stuff. When I showed Tyler the footage, he immediately started making excuses. He's going through a rough time right now. He just needs help. I said I was calling the police and Tyler actually grabbed my phone out of my hand. If you report my brother, we're done. I'm not dating someone who would destroy my family like that. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. His brother had literally robbed me and Tyler was acting like I was the bad person for wanting my stuff back. He'll pay you back when he gets on his feet, Tyler kept saying. You don't understand what he's been through. Our parents were really hard on him growing up. Jake had been fired from 6 jobs in 2 years for stealing from the register. This wasn't some momentary mistake. But Tyler refused to see it. He kept saying blood is blood and that I needed to be more understanding. Relationships are about compromise, he said. If you loved me, you'd let this go. The next week, Jake stole my bike from the parking garage. Tyler's response was that I should have locked it up better. The week after that, Jake took my emergency credit card and ran up $400 at a bar. Tyler said I shouldn't leave my wallet where people could find it. In my own apartment, where Jake wasn't supposed to be. Every time I brought up filing charges, Tyler would threaten to leave. I'm not choosing between you and my brother, but if you force me to, family comes first. He'd already chosen, though. He was choosing to let his brother rob me blind while I just had to take it. Tyler started getting meaner about it, too. Maybe if you weren't so materialistic, this wouldn't bother you so much. It's just stuff. You can buy another laptop. You're being really selfish right now. He actually called me selfish for wanting my stolen property back. His brother was coming over to Tyler's place all the time, and Tyler would invite me over knowing Jake would be there. Jake would smirk at me and make little comments. Nice earrings. Are those new? Knowing he'd stolen money from me. Tyler would just change the subject like nothing was happening. I was going crazy. My friends kept telling me to leave Tyler, but I'd been with him for 3 years and kept thinking he'd come to his senses. Plus, Jake had started threatening me in subtle ways. It would be really unfortunate if something happened to your car. Your apartment doesn't seem very secure. Tyler would say Jake was just joking and that I was being paranoid. Then one day I was at Tyler's apartment and he was in the shower. His phone kept buzzing on the coffee table. I wasn't going to look, but I saw Jake's name in a preview that said, "Did you get the rest of?" So I picked it up. The messages were insane. Tyler and Jake had been planning this for months. Tyler would tell Jake when I wasn't home. Tyler gave Jake the spare key. Tyler told him where I kept my emergency cash. Tyler even told him which jewelry was valuable. They were splitting everything 50-50. Tyler had been complaining about money troubles, and Jake offered to help him rob me. Tyler's messages said things like, "She's so naive she'll never figure it out," and "I'll just threaten to break up if she tries anything," and "After 3 years she's too invested to leave." They were literally laughing about how stupid I was. Jake had written, "Your girlfriend is like a personal ATM," and Tyler had responded with laughing emojis. There were messages about what to target next. Tyler was planning to get me to add him to my bank account so they could drain it slowly. He'd already started mentioning how couples should share finances and trust each other completely. I took photos of everything with my phone. Then I saw something else. Tyler had been texting another girl, Becca, sending her pictures of jewelry he was going to buy her, with my money. The jewelry Jake had stolen from me, Tyler was selling it and using the cash to impress some other girl. He'd been seeing her for 6 months, taking her to expensive restaurants while telling me we needed to stay in to save money. The kicker was that Becca was Jake's ex-girlfriend. She'd dumped Jake a year ago for being a thief and a liar. So Jake was helping Tyler steal from me to win over the girl who dumped Jake for being exactly what Tyler had become. I sent all the screenshots to myself and left before Tyler got out of the shower. That night, I called Jake's parole officer. Yeah, Jake was on parole for theft. Tyler had never mentioned that. I reported all the stolen items and provided the security footage and the text messages. Jake was arrested the next morning. Tyler called me, screaming that I'd ruined his brother's life and destroyed their family. I told him to check his messages. I hung up before he could say anything else. My hands were shaking so bad I almost dropped the phone. Within 2 minutes, my screen lit up with his name over and over. Call after call, text after text. I could see the previews popping up. Answer the phone. We need to talk. You're being crazy. This is all a misunderstanding. I turned my phone to silent and flipped it face down on my coffee table. I couldn't deal with him right now. I needed to focus on what came next. I pulled up my contacts and found Rosemary's number. She answered on the second ring. I told her everything. The phone messages, the conspiracy, Jake getting arrested, Tyler calling and screaming at me. She cut me off halfway through. She said she was coming over right now. She said she never trusted Tyler anyway, and there was no way she was letting me deal with this alone. She asked if I felt safe. I said I didn't know. She told me to lock my door and not answer it for anyone except her. She'd be there in less than an hour. I checked all my locks twice after we hung up. The apartment felt different now, like Tyler could show up any second. Rosemary arrived 53 minutes later with an overnight bag slung over her shoulder and a paper bag of Chinese food in her hands. I couldn't eat any of it. My stomach was twisted up too tight. We sat at my kitchen table and I pulled up all the screenshots on my phone. There were so many of them. Messages going back months. Rosemary helped me organize them by date so we could see the whole pattern. Tyler telling Jake when I'd be at work. Tyler describing where I kept my emergency cash in the bedroom closet. Tyler listing which pieces of jewelry were worth the most money. Jake sending laughing emojis about me being a personal ATM. Tyler talking about getting access to my bank account. It was all right there. Clear as anything. Rosemary kept shaking her head and saying she couldn't believe it. But she could believe it. She'd told me months ago that something felt off about Tyler. I just hadn't wanted to listen. We were still going through everything when someone started pounding on my door. Heavy fists. Bang, bang, bang. Then Tyler's voice yelling from the hallway. He was saying I had no right to go through his phone. That I violated his privacy. That I needed to let him explain everything. That Jake's arrest was my fault. Rosemary grabbed her phone and dialed 911 before I could even move. I sat frozen at the kitchen table while she talked to the operator. She gave them my address and said my ex-boyfriend was harassing me and refusing to leave. Tyler kept pounding, kept yelling. I could hear other apartment doors opening. Neighbors coming out to see what was happening. The police arrived maybe 15 minutes later. I heard their voices in the hall telling Tyler he needed to leave the property immediately. Tyler tried to explain that I was his girlfriend and I was being unreasonable. One of the officers said he didn't care about relationship drama. Tyler either left right now or they'd arrest him for trespassing. I heard Tyler's voice getting quieter as they walked him toward the stairs. Then it was silent. Rosemary and I just sat there for a minute not saying anything. Then she got up and made sure my door was locked again. The next morning, I called my landlord Celia as soon as I thought she'd be awake. I told her what happened with Tyler and that he had a key to my apartment. I needed my locks changed immediately. She said she was sorry I was going through this. She said she could have a locksmith there within 2 hours, but I'd have to pay the service fee. I said that was fine. I just needed Tyler to not be able to get in anymore. The locksmith showed up an hour and 40 minutes later. Rosemary and I watched him take apart my old locks and install new ones. He put in a deadbolt too. The whole thing cost me $200 I really couldn't afford right now. But knowing Tyler couldn't just walk in anymore made it worth every penny. While the locksmith was finishing up, I searched online for Jake's parole officer information. It took me 20 minutes to find the Wright County website and figure out who was assigned to his case. Her name was Bella Townsend. I called the number listed and got her voicemail. I left a message explaining who I was, and that I had evidence of Jake violating his parole. She called me back 30 minutes later. I told her everything. The thefts, the security camera footage, the text messages between Tyler and Jake planning it all. She asked me to email her everything I had. I sent her the video files and screenshots while we were still on the phone. She was quiet for a minute after I sent it. Then she said this was a clear parole violation. She was issuing a warrant for Jake's arrest immediately. She said Jake had already been on thin ice for missing his last 2 check-ins. This theft conspiracy would definitely send him back to prison. She thanked me for reporting it and said she'd call me back with updates. 6 hours later, my phone rang. It was Bella. She said Jake had been arrested at Tyler's apartment. Apparently, he'd been staying there the whole time. She said Jake would have a parole violation hearing within the week, and he'd also be facing new criminal charges for all the thefts. She asked if I'd be willing to testify if it went to trial. I said yes. Absolutely yes. That same night, my phone started going crazy with texts from numbers I didn't recognize. The first one said it was Tyler and he was sorry and we needed to talk. The second one, from a different number, said I was being cruel to his family and they didn't deserve this. Then another number sent a long message about how his parents were crying, and it was all my fault for being vindictive. I realized he was using different phones or apps to get around me blocking him. Over the next 2 days, I got maybe 30 messages from at least 8 different numbers. Some were apologetic and said he still loved me and we could work this out. Others were angry and blamed me for ruining his brother's life over material things. One message said his mom was having panic attacks because of what I did. Another said I was handling this the wrong way and destroying their whole family instead of dealing with it privately like adults. I screenshotted every single message as it came in. Then I forwarded them all to Bella with a note explaining that Tyler was harassing me from multiple numbers. She called me back within an hour and said this was witness intimidation, and she was documenting everything for the prosecutor. She told me to stop responding completely and just keep collecting evidence. She said the legal system would handle Tyler and I didn't need to engage with him at all. I felt relieved hearing that because part of me wanted to text back and tell him exactly what I thought of him. But I followed her advice and didn't respond to any of it. 3 days after Jake's arrest, I got a call from a detective named Victor Maynard. He said he was assigned to investigate the thefts, and he wanted to talk to me about filing formal charges against both Jake and Tyler. He said the text messages I'd provided made this a clear conspiracy case, and the district attorney was very interested in prosecuting both brothers. We scheduled a meeting at the police station for the next morning. I showed up at 9 and Detective Maynard met me in the lobby. He was probably in his 40s with graying hair and he seemed genuinely concerned about my situation. He took me to an interview room and recorded everything while I gave my full statement. I told him about every item that was stolen, the exact dates when I noticed things missing, and how Tyler reacted each time I wanted to report it. I explained how Tyler would threaten to break up with me if I called the police, and how he called me selfish for caring about my stolen property. I described the months of gaslighting where Tyler made me feel like I was overreacting or being paranoid. Detective Maynard asked detailed questions about Tyler's threats and wrote down everything I said. When I finished talking, he looked genuinely angry on my behalf. He said what Tyler did was psychological abuse on top of the theft conspiracy, and he was going to make sure both brothers faced real consequences. He told me they were building a case for conspiracy to commit theft, criminal trespass, and possibly identity theft for the credit card fraud. He said Tyler's text messages, where he admitted to planning everything and called me naive, made the prosecution's job much easier. He said those messages showed clear intent and premeditation. 2 days later, Detective Maynard called me and said Tyler had been arrested at his workplace that morning. He was charged as an accomplice to all of Jake's crimes, plus additional charges for the conspiracy. I felt this weird mix of vindication and anxiety when I heard that. Part of me was glad Tyler was finally facing consequences, but another part worried about what he might do next, since he was clearly unstable and vindictive. That same afternoon, my phone started ringing with calls from numbers I didn't recognize. I let them go to voicemail and discovered they were from Tyler's parents. His mother left 3 long voicemails crying about how I was destroying their family over material possessions. She said Tyler was a good person who made a mistake, and I was being cruel by pressing charges. She said their family would never recover from this, and it was all because I couldn't forgive and move on. I saved every voicemail as evidence, but I didn't call back. Detective Maynard had told me to avoid any contact with Tyler's family and let him handle everything. The calls kept coming for 2 more days until I finally blocked those numbers too. That weekend, Rosemary came over and said we needed to file a restraining order against Tyler. She'd been keeping track of his harassment, and she said he'd driven past my apartment building 3 times the night before. She'd been staying with me on and off since everything started, and she'd seen his car go by slowly each time. We went to the courthouse on Monday morning and filled out all the paperwork for a temporary restraining order. I listed all the harassing messages, the voicemails from his parents, and Rosemary's statement about him driving past my building. The judge reviewed everything and granted a temporary order right there. He scheduled a hearing for a permanent order in 2 weeks. I felt a little safer knowing Tyler legally had to stay away from me now. That night, I tried to log into our shared streaming accounts to watch something and distract myself. Every single password had been changed. Tyler had gone through Netflix, Hulu, Amazon, everything we shared, and locked me out of all of them. It was such a petty move, but it hurt more than it should have. It reminded me that Tyler was vindictive and would try to hurt me in whatever small ways he could reach me. I had to set up my own accounts and pay for new subscriptions I couldn't really afford. The next morning, my credit card company called about the fraudulent charges Jake had made at the bar. I had to fill out a bunch of dispute forms and provide copies of the police reports. The representative said it would take 30 to 60 days for them to investigate and potentially refund the money. She said I needed to document everything and stay in contact with the detective handling my case. I spent an hour on the phone going through every charge and explaining how my card was stolen. The next day, I printed out the list of local pawn shops that Detective Maynard had given me and started calling each one to ask if they had my laptop. The first 3 places said no and sounded annoyed that I was bothering them. The 4th place put me on hold for 5 minutes while someone checked the back room. The guy came back and said they might have something matching my description, but I'd need to come in to verify it. I drove over there immediately, my hands gripping the steering wheel too tight the whole way. The pawn shop was in a sketchy part of town with bars on the windows and a buzzer system to get in. The owner was this older guy with reading glasses hanging on a chain around his neck. He brought out my laptop from behind the counter, and I recognized it instantly from the sticker I'd put on the back. He pulled up his records on an ancient computer and showed me that someone named Jake Cannon had sold it exactly 2 weeks ago for $200. I took pictures of everything with my phone, and the owner said he'd hold it as evidence if the police needed it. I called Detective Maynard from the parking lot and told him what I found. He said he'd pick it up that afternoon and log it into evidence for the case. When he retrieved the laptop later, he called to tell me it was officially part of the criminal investigation now. He explained I wouldn't get it back until after the trial was over because they needed it to prove Jake had stolen and sold my property. I understood, but it still frustrated me because I'd already bought a replacement laptop I couldn't afford. At least knowing where it was felt like something, even if I still didn't have my grandmother's ring or the $800 cash. My rent was due in 3 days, and I was short by $400, even after the insurance payout. I'd been avoiding Celia because I knew I couldn't pay on time, and I was embarrassed about the whole situation. Finally, I went to her office in the building and explained everything that had happened. I brought copies of the police reports and showed her the case numbers for the theft charges. She listened to the whole story without interrupting, and then said she'd dealt with theft before and knew how hard it was to recover financially. She told me she'd waive the late fees for this month and work with me on a payment plan for the rest. Her kindness made my eyes water, and I had to blink fast to keep from crying in front of her. That afternoon, the DA's office called with news about Jake's case. The prosecutor said they were offering Jake a plea deal if he agreed to testify against Tyler and provide information about where all the stolen items were sold. I felt angry that they were negotiating with the person who'd actually broken into my apartment and stolen my stuff. The prosecutor explained that Jake's testimony would guarantee Tyler's conviction because Jake could describe exactly how Tyler had planned everything. Without Jake's cooperation, they'd have to rely more heavily on the text messages and circumstantial evidence. I didn't like it, but I understood they were trying to make sure Tyler faced consequences too. 3 days later, the prosecutor called again to say Jake had accepted the plea deal. Jake admitted in his statement that Tyler had planned the entire thing and told him exactly when I wouldn't be home. The prosecutor read me parts of Jake's confession where he described Tyler giving him the spare key and telling him which items were most valuable. Jake would serve 18 months in county jail for the parole violation and the new theft charges. Tyler would face trial for conspiracy, fraud, and all the other charges because he'd been the one who came up with the plan. The next morning, I had to tell my boss what was going on because I kept spacing out at work, and I'd need time off for court appearances. I walked into her office feeling like I might throw up from nervousness. She closed the door and told me to sit down and take my time explaining. I went through the whole story about Tyler and Jake and the thefts and the upcoming trial. She surprised me by being completely supportive and saying she'd work with me on the scheduling for court dates. Then she told me she'd gone through something similar with an ex years ago, and she understood how hard it was to focus on work when your personal life was falling apart. A week later, Detective Maynard called to say Tyler's lawyer had contacted him trying to negotiate a plea deal. The DA had refused because Tyler was the mastermind who'd shown no remorse for what he'd done. They wanted to take this case to trial to send a message about relationship manipulation and financial abuse. The prosecutor felt strongly that Tyler's case could help other victims recognize similar patterns of control and theft. The restraining order hearing happened on a Tuesday morning, and I had to take half a day off work. Tyler showed up with a lawyer who argued I was being dramatic about a normal relationship dispute. His lawyer said couples fight about money all the time, and that didn't justify a permanent restraining order. I presented all the evidence, including the conspiracy text messages, the threats Tyler had made, and the harassment from him and his family. The judge read through everything carefully and then granted a permanent restraining order without any hesitation. He said the evidence showed a clear pattern of manipulation, financial abuse, and intimidation. Tyler had to stay at least 500 feet away from me, my home, and my workplace at all times. 2 days later, I was at work when the receptionist called my desk to say someone was in the lobby asking for me. I walked out there and saw Tyler standing by the front desk. My stomach dropped, and I immediately turned around and went back to my office. I called security and told them Tyler had a restraining order and wasn't supposed to be here. Security escorted him out while he kept yelling that he just needed to talk to me and explain his side. They called the police, and Tyler was arrested right there in the parking lot for violating a court order. Detective Maynard called me an hour later to say Tyler had been taken into custody, and this violation would add another charge to his case. Finally, some good news came when Detective Maynard called about my grandmother's ring. Jake had admitted during his plea negotiations that he'd given the ring to Tyler instead of selling it himself. Tyler had taken it to a jewelry store downtown and sold it for $300. The store owner still had the ring in his inventory and agreed to return it once the criminal case was resolved. Detective Maynard said I'd get it back after Tyler's trial concluded. Knowing where my grandmother's ring was and that I'd eventually get it back made me feel lighter than I had in weeks. A few days after getting that news about the ring, Rosemary came over and found me checking all my locks for the third time that evening. She sat me down and said I needed to talk to someone professional about what I was going through, because the constant checking and the fact that I hadn't slept more than 4 hours a night in weeks wasn't normal. I tried to brush it off, but she pulled up a therapist's website on her phone and made me call right there to schedule an appointment. The therapist had an opening the next week and specialized in trauma from relationship manipulation, which Rosemary had specifically searched for. The first session felt weird sitting in this small office with soft lighting trying to explain to a stranger how my boyfriend had orchestrated a months-long conspiracy to rob me. But the therapist didn't look shocked or skeptical. She just nodded and took notes and asked questions about Tyler's specific manipulation tactics. She explained how threatening to leave someone if they report a crime is a textbook control method, and how the gaslighting about my apartment security was designed to make me blame myself instead of the actual criminals. By the end of the hour, I felt like someone finally understood that this wasn't just a bad breakup. It was calculated abuse disguised as a relationship. 2 days later, I got a message request on social media from someone named Liam, who said he used to work with Tyler and had information that might help my case. I immediately forwarded the message to Detective Maynard before responding, and he told me to set up a meeting at a public place and he'd be there. We met at a coffee shop downtown the next afternoon, and Liam showed up looking nervous, but determined. Detective Maynard sat at our table, and Liam started explaining how Tyler used to brag about me at work, but not in a good way. Liam pulled out his phone and showed us text messages where Tyler had talked about how easy it was to manipulate me, and how I was too stupid to notice what was happening. The messages made my face burn with anger and embarrassment, seeing Tyler mock me to his coworkers while pretending to love me at home. Liam said he'd felt guilty about not saying anything sooner, but he thought Tyler was just being a jerk, not actually committing crimes. Detective Maynard asked if he could forward those messages, and Liam agreed immediately, saying he wanted to help however he could. The messages Liam provided were even more detailed than the ones I'd found on Tyler's phone, including one where Tyler explicitly discussed his plan to convince me to add him to my bank account and then drain it slowly over several months before breaking up with me. Detective Maynard added everything to the evidence file and later called to say the DA was thrilled because it demonstrated clear premeditation and would make their case significantly stronger. Around the same time, Detective Maynard interviewed Becca and discovered she'd had no idea Tyler had a girlfriend the entire time they were seeing each other. She was horrified when Detective Maynard showed her photos of me and Tyler together from social media, some of which were taken on the same days Tyler had taken her to expensive restaurants. Becca provided receipts showing Tyler had spent over $1,500 on her during their 6 months together, money that came directly from selling my stolen property. She agreed to testify about the gifts and dinners, which would help prove Tyler had personally benefited from the thefts instead of just helping his brother. I ran into Becca in the courthouse hallway a few weeks later during a preliminary hearing, and she came over to apologize for her part in everything, even though she hadn't known. I told her it wasn't her fault, and that Tyler had lied to both of us. But I was too exhausted to have a long conversation about his manipulation tactics, so I kept it brief and polite. Small pieces of good news started trickling in after months of nothing but stress and loss. My insurance company finally finished processing my claim and agreed to reimburse me $1,200 for the laptop and other stolen items, minus my $500 deductible. It wasn't everything I'd lost, but getting that check helped me catch up on bills I'd been struggling with and start rebuilding my emergency fund from zero. A week after that, the credit card company concluded their fraud investigation and refunded the full $400 Jake had charged at the bar. Plus, they issued me a new card with enhanced security features and fraud monitoring. These small victories helped me feel less completely violated, like I was slowly taking back control of my finances and my life. The DA's office called to tell me Tyler's trial date had been set for 6 weeks away, and I needed to come in to prepare my testimony. Requested Reds is on Spotify now. Check out link in the description or comments. I met with the DA in her office and she walked me through what to expect, explaining that Tyler's defense lawyer would try to make the whole thing look like a normal relationship dispute about money instead of calculated theft and manipulation. She showed me the kinds of questions they'd ask, trying to suggest I was being vindictive about the affair or exaggerating Tyler's threats because I was angry about the breakup. The DA coached me to stay calm and factual, to focus on the timeline of events and the evidence rather than getting emotional about the betrayal. Over the next week, I practiced my testimony with both the DA and Rosemary, going over every detail of the thefts, Tyler's threats when I wanted to report them, and the moment I discovered the conspiracy texts on his phone. The DA kept emphasizing that I needed to be clear and specific about dates and amounts, and that my calm presentation would be more effective with the jury than crying or showing anger. Rosemary played the role of the defense attorney and asked me harsh questions about why I stayed with Tyler if he was so terrible, trying to prepare me for the actual cross-examination. The DA said I was a strong witness and that my ability to present facts without breaking down would make me credible to the jury. 2 weeks before trial, Tyler's lawyer made one final attempt at a plea deal, where Tyler would plead guilty to reduced charges and serve only 1 year in county jail, instead of facing multiple felonies at trial. The DA called to ask my opinion on whether she should accept it, and I told her absolutely not, because Tyler deserved to face full consequences for what he'd planned and done. I wanted a jury to hear everything about the conspiracy, the manipulation, the threats, and the complete lack of remorse he'd shown even after getting caught. The DA agreed and rejected the plea offer, telling Tyler's lawyer we'd see them in court. 3 days after I turned down the plea deal, Detective Maynard called with news that made my stomach drop. Tyler had tried to log into my bank account online using old passwords from when we were dating. The bank's fraud system caught it and blocked him automatically, then sent me an alert and filed a report with the police. Detective Maynard sounded almost excited when he told me this gave the DA another charge to add for attempted identity theft. Tyler was out on bail and still trying to steal from me even after getting arrested. The DA added the new charge to the case that same afternoon. A week later, I was making dinner in my apartment when my buzzer rang around 7 in the evening. I wasn't expecting anyone and almost didn't answer, but then Celia's voice came through telling me to stay inside and lock my door. I looked out my window and saw Tyler's parents in the parking lot arguing with Celia near the building entrance. His mom was crying and his dad kept pointing up toward my floor. Celia stood between them and the door with her arms crossed, and I could hear her voice carrying up even though I couldn't make out the words. Tyler's parents wouldn't leave even after Celia told them they were on private property and needed to go. His mom kept trying to get past Celia to reach the building entrance. Celia pulled out her phone and called the police right there in front of them. 2 officers showed up 15 minutes later and gave Tyler's parents official trespassing warnings that went on their record. I watched from my window as the officers took down their information and explained they couldn't come back to the property. Tyler's dad was red in the face and yelling something I couldn't hear. His mom kept looking up at my window with tears running down her face. After they finally left, Celia came up to my apartment to check on me. She said Tyler's parents had been demanding to know my apartment number and insisting they just wanted to talk to me about dropping the charges. Celia refused to give them any information and told them they had no right to harass me on property she managed. She updated the building security instructions to include photos of Tyler and his parents, with notes that they weren't allowed on the premises. 2 weeks later, the preliminary hearing happened at the county courthouse. I had to sit in a small courtroom and tell a judge about everything Tyler and Jake had stolen while Tyler sat 20 feet away with his lawyer. Tyler stared at me the whole time with this look that made my skin crawl. His lawyer was this older guy in an expensive suit who kept trying to make me seem like I was being dramatic. He asked why I stayed with Tyler for 3 years if he was so terrible to me. I explained the cycle of manipulation and gaslighting as calmly as I could, using the exact words my therapist had taught me. The lawyer suggested I was just angry about Tyler seeing someone else and exaggerating everything to get revenge. I told him about the text messages where Tyler admitted planning the thefts and called me naive. The DA showed the judge printed copies of those messages, and Tyler's lawyer got quiet after that. The judge reviewed all the evidence, including the security footage, text messages, Jake's testimony, and the bank fraud attempt. He said there was more than enough evidence to proceed to trial on all charges, including conspiracy to commit theft, fraud, criminal trespass, witness intimidation, and attempted identity theft. Tyler's bail got increased from $10,000 to $25,000, and he had to surrender his passport to the court. His parents had to put up their house to make the new bail amount. Tyler's face went completely white when the judge announced the passport thing. A few days after the hearing, Detective Maynard called to say I could pick up my laptop from the evidence room since they'd made copies of everything they needed. I drove to the police station and signed about 6 different forms to get it back. Holding my laptop again felt weird after buying a replacement and getting used to the new one. I took it home and wiped the hard drive completely, reinstalling the operating system from scratch. I didn't want any trace of the investigation or Tyler's presence on it. The whole process took 3 hours, but I felt better knowing it was totally clean. That weekend, Rosemary came over to help me go through my apartment and remove everything that reminded me of Tyler. We filled 3 cardboard boxes with stuff he'd given me, photos of us together, and random items that just made me think of him. A coffee mug he always used, a blanket we'd bought together, concert tickets stuck to my fridge. Rosemary didn't ask questions about any of it, just helped me pack everything up. We drove to a donation center and dropped off 2 boxes, then threw the 3rd box in a dumpster behind her apartment building. Getting rid of all that stuff felt good in a way I hadn't expected. My apartment looked emptier, but it felt more like mine again. My therapy appointments continued every week, and we spent a lot of time talking about the red flags I'd missed with Tyler. My therapist helped me see that his manipulation wasn't something I should have magically detected. She explained that people like Tyler are good at what they do, and that being trusting doesn't make me stupid. Tyler's actions showed his character, not my worth as a person. We made lists of warning signs to watch for in future relationships. Things like someone trying to isolate me from friends, making me doubt my own memory, or getting angry when I set boundaries. The week before the trial was supposed to start, I drove out to the cemetery where my grandmother was buried. I sat on the grass next to her headstone and told her everything that had happened with her ring. How Tyler and Jake had stolen it and sold it, how the police had recovered it and I'd get it back after the trial. I promised her I'd keep it safe this time and never let anyone I was dating have access to my apartment unsupervised. Talking to her gravestone probably seemed crazy, but it made me feel less alone in the whole mess. 3 days before trial, Tyler's lawyer filed one more motion trying to get the case thrown out. He argued that the text messages shouldn't be allowed as evidence because I'd taken them without Tyler's permission. The DA called me worried that the judge might actually consider it. We had to go back to court for another hearing where the judge would decide. Tyler's lawyer stood up and gave this long speech about privacy rights and illegal searches. The DA argued that I had legitimate access to Tyler's phone when I found the messages. I'd been an invited guest in his apartment, and his phone was sitting on the coffee table in plain view. The judge asked me directly if Tyler knew I was at his apartment that day. I said yes. He was in the shower and knew I was waiting for him in the living room. The judge ruled that I had every right to look at a phone left unattended in a shared space where I was invited guest. The text messages would be allowed as evidence. Tyler's lawyer looked frustrated but couldn't argue with the ruling. Finally, 6 weeks after I'd rejected the plea deal, the trial began. I sat in the gallery with Rosemary while the DA gave her opening statement. She told the jury this was a case about betrayal, manipulation, and calculated theft. Tyler's lawyer gave his opening statement claiming this was just a family dispute blown out of proportion. Then the DA started presenting evidence. The security footage of Jake entering my apartment played on a screen for the whole courtroom to see. You could see Jake using the spare key to unlock my door, walking straight to my bedroom, going through my drawers, and taking my laptop and jewelry box. The timestamp showed the exact date and time. Tyler's lawyer couldn't dispute the video because it was too clear. Instead, he tried to argue that Tyler didn't know what Jake was planning, and that Jake had acted on his own without Tyler's knowledge. The DA smiled and said she'd be presenting text message evidence that would prove otherwise. The next day, Jake took the witness stand wearing an orange jumpsuit with his hands cuffed in front of him. The bailiff removed the cuffs once he sat down, and Jake looked smaller than I remembered, hunched over in the witness box. The DA started asking him questions about his relationship with Tyler, and when they first discussed stealing from me. Jake spoke quietly at first, saying Tyler had come to him 6 months ago complaining about money problems and asking if Jake knew any way to make quick cash. Jake admitted he suggested they could take things from me since Tyler had access to my apartment and knew my schedule. The DA asked Jake to describe how they planned it, and Jake went through everything in detail. Tyler told him which days I worked late. Tyler gave him the spare key I didn't know existed. Tyler sent him photos of my apartment layout and marked where I kept valuables. Tyler even told him my grandmother's ring was worth at least $2,000 and to make sure he grabbed it. Jake said they split everything 50-50, and Tyler would meet him after each theft to divide the money and decide what to sell. Tyler's lawyer stood up for cross-examination and immediately started attacking Jake's character. He brought up Jake's criminal record, his 6 firings for theft, his parole status. He suggested Jake was lying to get a reduced sentence, and that he'd stolen from me on his own without Tyler's knowledge. Jake stayed calm and said he had text messages proving Tyler was involved. The DA pulled up the messages on the courtroom screen and Jake walked through each one, showing how they matched his testimony perfectly. Tyler's lawyer tried to suggest Jake had faked the messages somehow, but the phone company records confirmed every text was real and sent from Tyler's actual phone number. When Jake stepped down, I could see Tyler staring at him with pure hatred, and Jake wouldn't look in his direction at all. Then it was my turn to testify. I walked to the witness stand on shaky legs and put my hand on the Bible, while the clerk asked if I swore to tell the truth. The DA started with basic questions about my relationship with Tyler and how long we'd been together. I explained we'd dated for 3 years and I'd trusted him completely, even giving him a key to my apartment after the first year. She asked me to describe the first theft, and I walked through coming home to find my laptop and grandmother's ring missing. I told the jury about the security camera footage showing Jake entering with a key, and how Tyler immediately made excuses when I showed him the video. The DA had me describe each subsequent theft, and Tyler's reaction every time. She asked about his threats to break up with me if I reported Jake, and I repeated what Tyler had said about family coming first, and me being materialistic. Then she asked about finding the text messages on Tyler's phone, and I described exactly what I'd seen that day in his apartment. I went through the messages about me being naive, about draining my bank account, about me being a personal ATM. The DA displayed the actual screenshots on the screen and asked me to read specific ones out loud. My voice shook reading Tyler call me stupid and laugh about manipulating me. The DA asked how I felt discovering Tyler had been seeing another woman with money from my stolen property, and I said it made me realize the entire relationship had been fake from the start. Tyler's lawyer took over for cross-examination, and his first question was whether I was angry about Tyler's affair. I said yes, of course I was angry. He suggested I was exaggerating the theft conspiracy to get revenge on Tyler for cheating. I stayed calm and said the text messages spoke for themselves and I hadn't written those. He asked why I'd stayed with Tyler if he was so terrible, implying I was making things up now. I explained how manipulation works, how Tyler had gradually isolated me and made me doubt my own judgment. The lawyer kept pushing, asking if I'd ever given Tyler permission to take things from my apartment. I said no, never, and he had no right to give Jake a key without asking me. He asked if maybe I'd misunderstood Tyler's text messages and taken them out of context. I looked directly at the jury and said there was no context where laughing about your girlfriend being a personal ATM was acceptable. The lawyer tried a few more questions, but I didn't get flustered, just kept referring back to the evidence. After 3 hours of testimony, the judge finally let me step down, and I walked back to sit with Rosemary, my legs barely holding me up. Liam testified next and described working with Tyler 2 years ago at a retail store. He said Tyler had bragged constantly about having a girlfriend who was easy to manipulate financially. Liam remembered Tyler saying I was too trusting and would believe anything he told me. He testified that Tyler had specifically mentioned planning to get added to my bank account, so he could access my money directly. The DA asked if Tyler had ever expressed guilt or concern about deceiving me, and Liam said no, Tyler had thought it was funny. Then Becca took the stand and confirmed she'd dated Tyler for 6 months without knowing he had a girlfriend. She provided receipts showing Tyler had spent over $1,500 taking her to expensive restaurants and buying her jewelry. The DA showed her photos of items Jake had stolen from me, and Becca identified 2 necklaces Tyler had given her as gifts. She looked genuinely upset testifying and apologized to me directly from the witness stand, which the judge told her not to do. Tyler's lawyer tried to suggest Becca was lying to avoid looking bad herself, but she had dated receipts and text messages proving everything she said. The DA spent the next day presenting financial evidence. She showed the jury Tyler's bank records with cash deposits that matched exactly what Jake had stolen from me. $800 deposited the day after my rent money disappeared. $300 2 days after my grandmother's ring was sold. $400 the week after Jake used my credit card. The phone records showed Tyler and Jake texted or called each other 73 times during the 2 months when the thefts occurred. The DA highlighted calls made right before and right after each theft, showing coordination. She presented the pawnshop records for my laptop and jewelry store records for my grandmother's ring, proving Jake had sold them and Tyler had received half the money. The evidence was overwhelming, and Tyler's lawyer kept objecting to various technical points, but the judge overruled him every time. By the end of the prosecution's case, Tyler looked pale and kept whispering urgently to his lawyer. Tyler's lawyer called him to the stand on the third day of trial. Tyler wore a suit and tried to look sympathetic as he answered questions. He claimed he'd only been trying to help his troubled younger brother who had addiction issues and needed money. He said he'd given Jake my spare key because Jake was homeless and needed a place to stay sometimes when I wasn't home. Tyler testified that he had no idea Jake was stealing from me until I showed him the security footage. He said the text messages were taken out of context, and he'd been joking around with his brother, not actually planning thefts. Tyler claimed he never intended for me to be hurt financially, and he'd planned to pay me back for everything once Jake got on his feet. His lawyer asked about the affair with Becca, and Tyler said he'd been confused about our relationship and made a mistake. But that didn't make him a thief. He actually started crying on the stand, talking about how much he'd loved me and how sorry he was that things had gotten so messed up. His parents were crying in the gallery, and Tyler kept looking at them for support. The DA stood up for cross-examination with a stack of printed text messages in her hand. She asked Tyler to explain the message where he called me naive and said I'd never figure out what they were doing. Tyler stammered and said it was just trash talk between brothers. She read another message where Tyler told Jake exactly when I'd be at work and which window was easiest to access. Tyler claimed he'd been joking and didn't think Jake would actually break in. The DA read the message where Tyler said I was too invested after 3 years to leave him even if I suspected something. Tyler said he'd been venting frustration, not planning crimes. She pulled up the message where Jake wrote that I was like a personal ATM, and Tyler responded with laughing emojis. Tyler had no explanation for that one and just said it looked bad out of context. The DA asked what context made laughing about your girlfriend being an ATM acceptable, and Tyler couldn't answer. She brought up his plan to get added to my bank account and drain it slowly, reading his exact words from the texts. Tyler tried to say he'd never actually done that, so it didn't count, and the DA pointed out that was only because I discovered the conspiracy first. She asked about the expensive dinners with Becca, and the jewelry he'd bought her with money from my stolen property. Tyler got defensive and said his relationship with Becca had nothing to do with the theft charges. The DA showed the jury receipts proving the jewelry Tyler gave Becca was purchased the same week Jake sold my grandmother's ring. Tyler's face turned red and he started arguing with the DA until the judge told him to just answer the questions. By the time she finished, Tyler looked angry and flustered instead of sympathetic, and several jurors were shaking their heads. Closing arguments happened the next morning. The DA stood in front of the jury and laid out the entire conspiracy from start to finish. She emphasized that Tyler hadn't made a mistake or a bad decision. He'd planned for months to systematically rob his girlfriend. She talked about the betrayal of trust, how Tyler had weaponized my love for him to steal from me while threatening to leave if I tried to stop it. She pointed out that Tyler showed no remorse even when caught, instead trying to blame Jake and play the victim. The DA said the evidence was overwhelming and the jury's job was simple, to hold Tyler accountable for his calculated crimes. Tyler's lawyer gave his closing argument focusing on Tyler's clean record before this and his difficult family situation. He argued that Tyler had made poor choices trying to help his brother, but hadn't intended to hurt anyone. He suggested the text messages showed bad judgment and insensitive jokes, not criminal conspiracy. He asked the jury to show mercy and consider probation instead of prison time. His argument felt weak after everything the jury had heard, and he only spoke for 20 minutes compared to the DA's hour-long closing. The jury left to deliberate just before lunch. Rosemary and I went to a cafe across from the courthouse, but I couldn't eat anything. Just pushed food around my plate while we waited. My phone buzzed after 4 hours with a text from the DA saying the jury had reached a verdict. We rushed back to the courtroom and took our seats while the jury filed back in. The judge asked if they'd reached a verdict, and the foreman said yes. The clerk read out each charge, and after each one, the foreman said guilty. Conspiracy to commit theft, guilty. Criminal trespass, guilty. Fraud, guilty. Identity theft, guilty. Witness intimidation, guilty. I watched Tyler's face go from pale to gray as each guilty verdict was read. His mother started sobbing loudly in the gallery, and his father put his arm around her. Tyler just stared straight ahead like he couldn't process what was happening. The judge thanked the jury and dismissed them, then set a sentencing date for 3 weeks later. As the bailiff led Tyler away in handcuffs, he finally looked at me with an expression I couldn't read. Anger, maybe, or disbelief. I felt something lift off my chest, like I'd been holding my breath for months, and could finally breathe normally again. The DA found me in the hallway after and explained that Tyler faced up to 5 years in state prison, given the multiple convictions and the restraining order violation. She said I could give a victim impact statement at sentencing if I wanted to address the court directly. I told her yes, I wanted to speak. She gave me information about what to include and said to keep it focused on facts and how the crimes affected me. Rosemary hugged me tight and said she was proud of me for seeing this through. We drove back to my apartment and I felt exhausted but also vindicated. The jury had believed me. Tyler would face real consequences. It wasn't over yet, but the hardest part was done. I spent the next 2 weeks writing my victim impact statement. I'd start typing and then delete everything because it sounded too angry or too emotional. I wanted the judge to understand what Tyler had done to me beyond just the money he'd stolen. Rosemary came over one evening and read through my latest draft. She helped me cut out the parts that sounded like I was just venting and focus on concrete facts about how the betrayal had affected my life. We worked on it for hours, editing and rewriting until it felt powerful, but not overdramatic. I practiced reading it out loud to make sure I could get through it without breaking down. The statement ended up being 2 pages long, describing the financial hardship, the emotional manipulation, and the ongoing trust issues I was dealing with. Rosemary said it was perfect and would show the judge exactly why Tyler deserved serious prison time. The sentencing date arrived 3 weeks later. I got to the courthouse early with Rosemary, and we sat in the hallway outside the courtroom going over my statement one more time. My hands were shaking, and I kept reading the same paragraph over and over without actually processing the words. Rosemary squeezed my shoulder and told me I'd do fine, that Tyler needed to hear what he'd done to me. The bailiff called us in, and I walked to my seat at the front. Tyler was already there at the defense table in an orange jumpsuit with his hands cuffed in front of him. His lawyer sat next to him looking through papers. Tyler's parents were in the gallery behind him, and his mother was already crying quietly. The judge came in and everyone stood up. My legs felt wobbly, but I stayed upright. The judge asked if I wanted to give my victim impact statement, and I said yes. I walked up to the podium they had set up and unfolded my 2 pages with hands that wouldn't stop trembling. I started reading about how Tyler's manipulation had made me doubt my own judgment for months. I described checking my locks 5 times every night and having panic attacks when anyone got too close to my personal space. I explained how the financial theft had set me back months, because I'd had to replace my laptop and cover rent without my savings. I talked about the trust issues I was still working through in therapy and how I second-guessed every relationship now. I kept my voice steady and focused on facts like the DA had told me to. Tyler stared at the floor the entire time. He wouldn't look at me even once. His jaw was clenched and his shoulders were hunched forward like he was trying to make himself smaller. When I finished reading, I folded the papers back up and returned to my seat. The judge thanked me and asked if Tyler wanted to make a statement. Tyler's lawyer stood up and said his client wanted to address the court. Tyler stood up slowly and cleared his throat. He said he was sorry for what happened and that he'd made terrible choices. He said he took full responsibility and understood he needed to face consequences. It sounded rehearsed and empty. The judge didn't look impressed. She reviewed the charges and the jury's guilty verdicts on each count. Then she announced the sentence. 3 years in state prison with credit for the 4 months Tyler had already served. 3 years of probation after his release. And a restitution order for $4,000 covering everything stolen plus my expenses for new locks and therapy costs. It wasn't the maximum sentence of 5 years, but it felt real. Tyler's mother started sobbing loudly, and his father put his arm around her. Tyler just nodded slowly like he'd expected this. The bailiff came over to lead him out, and Tyler finally looked at me. His expression was blank. No anger or regret or anything I could read. Then he was gone through the side door. The judge dismissed everyone, and I stood up on shaky legs. Rosemary hugged me tight and said she was proud of me. The DA came over and shook my hand. She said the sentence was fair given the circumstances, and the restitution order meant Tyler would have to pay me back eventually. Detective Maynard appeared next to us and asked me to wait a moment. He went to talk to someone at the evidence desk and came back holding a small plastic bag. He opened it and pulled out my grandmother's ring. They'd recovered it from the jewelry store where Tyler had sold it. Detective Maynard handed it to me, and I just started crying. I'd thought I might never see it again. The ring was a little scratched, but still intact with the small diamond my grandfather had saved up for. I put it on my finger immediately and couldn't stop looking at it. This one piece of my grandmother was back where it belonged. Rosemary and I headed for the courthouse exit, and I was still crying a little. We pushed through the doors, and Tyler's parents were waiting on the steps. His mother started walking toward me with her arms out like she wanted to hug me or something. Celia appeared out of nowhere and stepped between us. Rosemary moved to my other side, and they formed a wall. Celia told Tyler's parents to stay away from me, and that they had no right to approach me after what their sons had done. Tyler's father started saying something about forgiveness and family, but Detective Maynard came out behind us. He told them to leave me alone and said the case was concluded, so there should be no more contact. He walked me to my car with Rosemary and Celia on either side. Detective Maynard said Tyler's family couldn't legally contact me now, and if they tried, I should call him immediately. I thanked him for everything and got in my car. Back at my apartment, the DA called to explain the restitution order. She said Tyler was required to pay me back the $4,000, but collecting from someone in prison would be difficult. Most inmates made pennies per hour at prison jobs, and it could take years for me to see any money. She told me not to expect payments anytime soon, and to focus on moving forward. I said I understood. The conviction itself felt like enough proof that I'd been right to report him. The money would be nice, but knowing Tyler faced real consequences mattered more. That evening, I sat down with my phone and started the process of changing my number. I went through every account and updated my contact information. I changed my email address too, creating a completely new one that Tyler and his family couldn't possibly know. It took 3 hours to update everything. Rosemary got my new number first, then my other close friends. I felt safer knowing Tyler wouldn't be able to reach me when he eventually got released in 3 years. No calls, no texts, no emails. He'd be completely cut off from me. My therapy appointment was 2 days later, and I told my therapist about the sentencing and getting my grandmother's ring back. We worked through how I was feeling about everything being over. She helped me see that I was actually stronger now than before all this happened. I'd learned to trust my gut when something felt wrong. I'd learned to set hard boundaries and stick to them even when someone tried to make me feel guilty. I'd learned that my well-being had to come first before trying to save relationships that hurt me. The trust issues were still there, but I was working on them. 3 months after Tyler's sentencing, my life had settled into a better routine. The insurance money had come through and I was getting steady paychecks from work. I'd rebuilt my emergency fund to $500 and I was adding to it every paycheck. I wanted to be more financially secure than I'd been before. I wanted enough savings that if something bad happened again, I wouldn't be completely helpless. I'd also started being more careful about who I let into my life and my space. Rosemary suggested we take a weekend trip to the beach to celebrate the case being over. We drove down on a Friday after work and checked into a cheap motel near the water. Saturday, we spent the whole day on the beach doing nothing. We talked about work and her dating life and movies we wanted to see. We didn't talk about Tyler at all. It was the first time in months I'd felt actually relaxed. My shoulders weren't tense and I wasn't constantly checking my phone. I realized I was thinking about Tyler less and less. I was focusing on my own future instead of replaying everything that had happened. 6 months after the trial, my boss called me into her office and I thought I was in trouble for something. Instead, she told me I was getting promoted to senior associate. She said I'd shown incredible strength and dedication despite everything I'd been going through. She'd noticed how I kept showing up and doing good work even when my personal life was falling apart. The promotion came with a raise that would help me feel more financially stable. I wouldn't be as vulnerable to someone trying to manipulate or use me for money again. I called Rosemary from my car and told her about the promotion, and we screamed together over the phone. Things were actually getting better. 8 months after the trial, I downloaded a dating app and immediately felt weird about it. My therapist said this was normal and that taking things slow was healthy. I matched with a few guys and went on coffee dates that were fine, but nothing special. One guy talked about his ex the entire time. Another one kept checking his phone. I noticed these things right away now, instead of making excuses for them. My therapist called this recognizing green flags versus ignoring red flags, and she said I was making real progress in trusting my judgment. I went on a date with someone who actually asked questions about my life and seemed genuinely interested in my answers. He paid for his own coffee without making a big deal about it. He didn't push for a second date immediately, but said he'd like to see me again if I was interested. These small things felt huge because they showed respect and consideration. I told my therapist about it and she smiled and said I was learning what healthy looked like. I was still cautious and I wasn't rushing into anything, but I felt hopeful for the first time in forever. A year after everything happened with Tyler, I'm sitting in my apartment that I can actually afford thanks to my promotion. The rent is manageable and I've decorated it the way I want without anyone criticizing my choices. My emergency fund has $1,500 in it now and I add to it every month. Rosemary comes over twice a week and we cook dinner and watch movies. My grandmother's ring sits on my right hand where I can see it every day, reminding me that I got through the worst thing that ever happened to me. Work is good, and my boss trusts me with bigger projects. I have friends who actually showed up when things got hard instead of disappearing. Tyler taught me that I'm stronger than I thought, and that I can trust myself completely. I won't settle for people who don't respect me ever again. That's it for today's story. Thanks for spending a few minutes here. It really makes this space feel special. I hope it added a little kindness to your day.